Great. Well, thank you all for coming today. We're here at Google, obviously, and in this social media world, we want everybody to know who's present here with us, but also over the internet, that you can follow the Jack Kemp Foundation on Facebook and Twitter. Our username on Twitter is @KempFoundation, and the hashtags for today's event are #KempForum and #TrueGrowth, and Senator Marco Rubio is @MarcoRubio. My name is Jimmy Kemp. On behalf of the Kemp Foundation and our partner Google, who we really appreciate hosting us today, we're grateful for this special meeting on the Kemp Forum on True Growth. True Growth is a designation that recognizes that growth comes from a dynamic source. It comes from humans. It doesn't come from government. It comes from the personal dynamic investment that has been best realized throughout history in these United States of America. We need a strong, balanced economic growth that results from the many kinds of investments that we make in people and productive property in order to provide for ourselves, our children, each other, whether as individuals or as members of a family, business, or government. So true growth is a critical designation. We don't just want growth that lasts for a little while. We need enduring, lasting growth. And when I was a kid, I grew up with words like lower tax rates, supply side economics, the gold standard. These were the first words that pop into my head when I think about my childhood. Strange childhood, I know. There was some football thrown around as well, but I learned about entrepreneurial capitalism. I also learned that there are no limits to our future if we don't put limits on our people. What are the elements of a real plan to get our economy growing? The goal of this forum is to explore the authentic growth principles that can be clearly and compellingly communicated to all Americans who are convinced that our nation can and must do better. I don't think anybody better captures that spirit than Senator Marco Rubio, the son of Cuban immigrants who came from humble beginnings to represent the Sunshine State of Florida in the United States Senate. It did not hurt that he was a standout wide receiver and defensive back in high school and college. We Kemps like football players. Among his many accolades, in 2012, Senator Rubio received the Kemp Leadership Award for exceptional leadership in championing the American idea. And I won't ever forget how he brought the crowd to its feet that night. He said, "Some people believe our problem is that the American people have changed, that too many people want things from government. But I'm still convinced that the overwhelming majority of our people just want what my parents had, a chance." A chance, that's what America needs. That's what America is all about. Not what some are calling the new normal of limited growth, fewer jobs and restricted opportunity. That's not America's future. The true normal for America is creativity and entrepreneurship and the willingness to take risks on what the future may bring. The minds yet to be educated, the businesses not yet opened, the technologies not yet discovered, the jobs waiting to be created. Wealth is not what we've done, my dad reminded us, but what we have yet to do. Here to lay out his vision for what we have yet to do, please welcome Senator Marco Rubio.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to Google and to the Jack Kemp Foundation for hosting me. For all of you, thank you as well for joining me here today this afternoon. So I want to begin by telling the story about when I was a young boy. I would sit for hours on the porch of our home listening to my grandfather's stories about history and about his life. My grandfather was born in rural Cuba in the last year of the 19th century. It was a time when there still were not airplanes in the sky. And yet 70 years later, he watched on television as an American walked on the moon. So his life spanned a time of extraordinary progress and change. He marveled at the opportunities that this new world presented. And in his stories, I sensed that he wondered what he could have achieved if he had been born in a different time and in a different place. My grandfather loved this country, and he never took it for granted because he knew what life was like outside of it. He knew firsthand that for almost all of human history, economic prosperity belonged primarily to those who were born into families that had power and influence. But he also knew that America was different because it was founded on the belief that every human being has a God-given right to pursue a happy life. And based on that belief, it is a country that put in place a free enterprise economy that rewards merit and work rather than social status and privilege. For over 200 years, equal opportunity has defined us as a nation and as a people. In fact, equal opportunity is so closely associated with us that the universal desire of people everywhere to achieve a better life has come to be known as the American dream. It's not a dream about acquiring wealth or fame. It's about having the opportunity to achieve happiness, to be free to worship as you choose, to raise a family in a safe and secure environment, to do meaningful and rewarding work, and to give your children a chance at a life better than your own. And so long before I had ever heard the term the American dream, my grandfather and my parents had instilled in me its underlying truth. And years later, I came to fully understand why he spent so much time when I was a boy talking to me about his own life growing up. What he wanted me to know was that unlike him, I was blessed to have been born in the one place on earth where the son of a bartender and a maid could dream and achieve the same dreams as a child born into privilege. Now, this still remains a country where you can get ahead through hard work and determination. But we also cannot deny that achieving this has become increasingly difficult for millions of Americans. A growing number of our people are gripped by economic insecurity, haunted by the realization that they are one bad break away from financial ruin. Despite their hard work, they feel like they can't get ahead, and they fear that they will be unable to leave their children a chance at a life better than their own. And as a result of these feelings, a growing number of people are losing confidence in the American dream. And we are left with a growing sense that the economic mobility and equality of opportunity that has defined our nation for so long, that is now eroding. And this feeling, by the way, is not without cause. Today, children born into poor families in places like France or Canada have a better chance of emerging from it than poor children born in America. This erosion of mobility and opportunity, it would be a problem for any nation. But for us, it is a crisis, an urgent crisis, because equal opportunity is at the core of our national identity. There simply cannot be an America without an American dream. Now, we've had recessions and depressions before. In those instances, the average economy took about 33 months. But our current recovery, it stands at 54 months and counting. And our feeble annual growth rates of 2 or 3% don't really offer much hope that it will end soon. In fact, the economy was projected to grow at 3.2% in the last quarter of 2013. But even that paltry number has turned out to be wishful thinking. It was recently revised down to 2.4%. Here's what's even more troubling: the projected long-term trends. The projected gross domestic product is a measure of the maximum amount of GDP you can achieve or economy can achieve if we are operating using all of our resources and are near full employment. Well, just 2 weeks ago, the Congressional Budget Office revised its estimate for potential GDP in the year 2017, and it is now 7.3% lower than the original forecast that they made back in 2007. What this means in the real world, it means a loss of $1.5 trillion in economic growth. It's a troubling sign that not only are we failing to reach our potential, but that unless we address the trends creating this erosion, The losses we suffered in the Great Recession, they threaten to become permanent. This anemic growth and economic underperformance that we're facing now isn't just due to the recession that began in 2007. It's primarily the result of trends that began well before then. In particular, a rapid, fundamental economic transformation of our economy that Washington hasn't even begun to seriously address. So while the 84 years that my grandfather lived were in the last century brought historic progress, the 21st century is seeing even more rapid and more dramatic change. For example, we no longer operate in simply a national economy. We are now vital participants in a global one. Things happening on the other side of the world can have a larger impact on your lives than things happening on the other side of town. This new economy comes with exciting opportunities and also with vexing challenges. For example, a global middle class has emerged, and it's eager and willing to buy the services we provide, the products we build, the food that we grow, the things that we invent. But it's also eager and willing to compete with us for jobs and business. Advances in technology have made communication and learning work faster and more productive. But it's also allowed machines to replace many of the jobs that people once relied upon to improve their lives. And we still have many jobs that can't be outsourced or automated, but the wages of many of these new jobs now are not keeping pace with the growing cost of things like childcare and healthcare and education. The problem is that while we are facing the full brunt of the disruptions created by this economic revolution, its opportunities are not reaching nearly enough Americans. And so the enormous challenge before us, the fundamental challenge before us, is to help more people overcome these problems and to access the promise of our time. Now here's the good news. There is no nation on earth better prepared to do this than ours. Another American century is actually within our reach. But achieving this is going to require us to replace the antiquated policies and institutions of the last century with ones built for this new era. For example, in the middle of the last century, we began a war on poverty. But 5 decades later, this effort remains incomplete. Why? Because while the anti-poverty programs in place today do help alleviate the pain of poverty, they do not help enough people emerge from it. So earlier this year, I proposed a wage enhancement credit that would encourage work. And I proposed streamlining our anti-poverty programs into a fund that would allow states to design their own creative ways and own creative initiatives to deal with the underlying causes of this poverty. Another example is in the 20th century, higher education became an option for more people than ever. But our current system of higher education is too expensive and too inflexible. It offers limited options for those who do not need and do not want a traditional 4-year degree. And it is graduating far too many people with degrees that lead to massive student loan debt rather than jobs. In the 21st century, higher education will no longer just be an option for some. It will be a necessity for all. That's why earlier this year I proposed creating additional pathways to earning a degree or a vocational certification, as well as new ways to open employment opportunities to those with non-traditional education. In fact, our host here today, Google, is a leader in this practice. 1 out of every 7 Google hires does not have a traditional bachelor's degree. Addressing our antiquated anti-poverty programs and reforming our education system are both important initiatives. But ultimately, in order for us to harness the promise of a new era and build another American century, what we are going to need are millions of new, middle, and higher income jobs. And we're going to face unprecedented global competition for these jobs. And it's a competition that we can win, but not unless we reform our current policies in Washington. And so today, what I'm grateful for is this opportunity to share with you a few of these reforms that will position us to compete and win in this new global economy. These policies are built on two fundamental principles. The first is that there's no better economic model for equality of opportunity than the American free enterprise system. Now, more government is often presented to people as the best way to help those who are trying to get ahead in life. But in fact, the bigger the government, the more involved the government is in the economy, the more your ability to influence that government determines your chance of success. And so only a free enterprise system that rewards merit and work can promote the upward mobility that our nation seeks. The second principle is that we cannot rebuild the American dream when 43% of the new jobs being created pay less than $16 an hour, and our economy is growing at only 2 or 3% a year. I worry that Washington, by the way, as Jimmy alluded to a moment ago, has begun to accept this bleak reality as the new normal. Rather than focusing on the policies that give the American people access to the entire banquet of economic opportunities, Washington seems to be arguing over how best to divide up the scraps. Look at the fervor surrounding the minimum wage debate. A $10.10 an hour minimum wage, that's not the American dream. We need jobs that pay $30 an hour, $40 an hour, $50 an hour, or much more. And we need to equip our people with the skills they will need for those types of jobs. And so with these two principles in mind, what I wanted to do today is outline 3 avenues of reform that will help us achieve another American century. The first is that we need new policies that encourage bold innovation. So making more of what we already produce, that can grow the economy. But innovating a new service or a new product can transform our economy. And we Americans innovate better than anyone else in the world. From the automobile to the airplane, from personal computer to the internet, from biomedicine to social media. Just think of all the jobs and careers that now exist as a direct result of American ingenuity. And these innovations, by the way, don't just spring out of a desire to earn more money. They actually come from something that runs much deeper. It's something in the hearts and minds of our people that set us apart from the world. And that is a profound desire to create, to innovate, to build, to take the resources given to our nation and carve something out of them that is beautiful and lasting. We want to build projects and companies that change not just our lives and not just the numbers in our bank account, but that change the world and that change it for the better. In fact, the power of innovation is present in this room right now. You have technology in your pocket that couldn't fit in an entire room 30 years ago. But 30 years from now, that same technology might fit on the tip of your finger or in a single blood cell. This progress is going to happen whether we like it or not. The question for Americans is whether we're going to continue to stand at the helm of those discoveries or whether we're going to fall behind and watch others take the lead. Now, right now, America remains the leading innovative nation on earth. Think of all the examples of American ingenuity. We can scarcely go a week without hearing of a new futuristic product being developed in the secret labs of Google X. Or look at SpaceX, which has revolutionized a once government-dominated industry. And by the way, it's helped revitalize the Space Coast in my home state of Florida. Every year, Americans are launching thousands of innovative startups in every conceivable field. The result is that with these new forces of innovation, plus the established manufacturing and production strength of our nation, 20% of the value of the world's goods are now made in America. And another 15% of the value of the goods made in the world are made by American companies in other countries. So think about this. Combined, our people, who make up 4% of the world's population, are producing 35% of the value of the world's products. And by the way, we produce the right products. So it's true, China produces more toys and shoes and toothbrushes than we do. But we're a global leader in high-value production. Our people create and build the airplane engines and the medicines and the medical devices that are used all over the world. And the exciting part is that as much as we innovate now, we can be doing so much more. But Washington has put up a blockade of restrictions and regulations and taxes that prevent innovators from accessing the full range of opportunities offered by the American free enterprise system. But with new pro-innovation policies, we can collapse these barriers and open new pathways to access our 21st century economy. Now, the first 14 years of this century have been any indicator. Much of our groundbreaking innovation is going to take place in the vast, still unexplored realm of digital media, particularly with devices and services that are related to the internet. So just in the last 20 years, the web has forever changed each and every industry in our economy, and quite frankly, in the world. And this revolution is not going to slow down. As seemingly ubiquitous as the internet is now, web traffic is expected to be 13 times as high by the year 2017. So ensuring that our people's access to the internet remains free and open is not simply some obscure technological discussion. It is now central to human freedom. Given this, it is not surprising that internet freedom has many, many enemies. Since the web is worldwide, and since it has proven such an effective catalyst for a pro-democratic revolution, it has become a battleground that many fight to control. There are currently 42 nations known to restrict or censor their people's online access. And many of these nations now wish to take this further by exerting control over the way the internet is governed and the way it is regulated internationally. Our current bottom-up, multi-stakeholder model that governs the web consists of independent boards and governments, businesses, civil society, and others. This model may currently be a topic for debate, but no one can question that it has been wildly effective at promoting a free and open internet. But now what we find is that there are governments lobbying for regulatory control by the United Nations or by a governmental regime. Opposing this takeover and preserving internet freedom must be a top national priority. And that's why I will soon introduce legislation to make the multi-stakeholder system the official policy of the United States. We must also recognize that here at home, too much of the digital realm is blocked by unnecessary federal restrictions. The more spectrum and bandwidth we can open up to the private sector, the more jobs it can create. Wireless spectrum now serves the same role as roads and highways. It is a critical means of conducting commerce and getting our products to market. And if spectrum is the highway of the digital age, we know that that highway is getting crowded and that traffic will only continue to get worse. If we do not address it, innovations will go unrealized. Consumers will face more dropped calls, overcapacity networks, and higher prices. But the shortage of wireless spectrum is about more than just personal inconvenience. It's about individual opportunity and economic mobility. Estimates are that for every 500 megahertz of spectrum made available for commercial use, an additional $87 billion is added to our gross domestic product, and an additional 350,000 jobs are created. And so to capitalize on this potential, I will soon introduce legislation that I am hoping will be bipartisan to increase wireless access and affordability. What this legislation will do is it will reallocate spectrum currently controlled by the federal government for commercial wireless services. The resulting innovation is going to create thousands of jobs. But our efforts to expand innovation should not simply be limited to technology. We must remain global pioneers in the fields such as science and medicine and energy. The federal government has an limited but important role to play in supporting basic research that will make this possible. Agencies such as NASA, the National Institutes of Health, and even the Department of Defense have historically been effective incubators of research, and they can continue to serve as a pipeline for private sector innovation. Our network of national labs has also long been a leading source of research, but they currently lack the ability to work with the private sector to translate this into American jobs. And that's why I, along with Senator Chris Coons, recently filed a bill called the America Innovates Act that will make it easier for our labs to work together with business to bring groundbreaking research to fruition in the marketplace. This research will be critical to sparking innovation, and innovation will be critical to creating those higher paying jobs that I talked about a moment ago in this new century. But innovation can only lead to more jobs if innovators have access to their customers. The emergence of a global middle class has created more potential customers than ever for our products and for our services. And yet our trade barriers and our domestic restrictions keep too many American businesses out of these emerging international markets. Globalization is already a fact, but much of the rest of the world is ahead of us in adapting and catching up to it. And so after spurring innovation, our second goal for reform must be to expand the markets for American products and services by actively and openly engaging in today's global economy. First and foremost, we need trade policies that make it easier for our products to reach a global network of consumers. Take, for example, a family-owned trucking business that transports export products from a manufacturer to ports. There are now billions of people around the world who want to and can afford to buy these American products. If we could make it easier to ship these products to those countries, the volume of work that this trucking company would have would grow dramatically. And this would mean not only that they would make more money, but they'd need to hire more drivers and buy more American-made trucks. Carefully crafted trade policies could be a boon to tens of thousands of small businesses like the one I just described. That's why I support trade promotional authority be given to the president. And it's why I support continued efforts to pursue regional and bilateral trade agreements, such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership with developed economies in Asia and in Latin America, and TTIP with Europe. Now, as we open up these new avenues for trade, we will also see growing opportunities to export American energy. As hundreds of millions of people around the world become drivers or move into modern homes, selling some of our vast energy resources will lead to explosive growth and higher paying jobs here at home. Despite burdensome federal rules and red tape, the United States has experienced a spike in energy production in recent years. We produced nearly 14% more energy in 2012 than in 2005, and this is projected to rise steadily in the years ahead. Nonetheless, we have to remember that we are in constant competition with other global energy producers. To stay competitive, we must promote access to the world to our nation's abundant resources. This means supporting rail transport for crude oil, which currently has come under regulatory attack. But it also means constructing a more efficient, modernized infrastructure to ease the transport of oil and natural gas. For example, the interstate highway system of the last century helped foster an explosion of economic opportunity. What we need now is an interstate energy pipeline system, because it could have a similar impact on our economy. And here's the good news. Unlike the interstate highways of the 1950s, the private sector, not taxpayers, can and will pay for this new system. What they need from government is a reduction or elimination of the regulations that are preventing the private sector from doing this now. Many of the regulations affecting energy transport that are on the books are decades old. They've resulted in a sluggish administrative certification process that often ends up leading to years of litigation, or as we've seen with the Keystone Pipeline, a seemingly endless wait while bureaucrats in Washington argue about the details. In fact, there's an effort underway to build a natural gas pipeline in Florida. But before the construction can even begin, the businesses involved have to spend months under the review of as many as 6 different federal agencies. So we should explore ways to streamline the regulatory review process for natural gas pipelines. And we must eliminate the barriers that prevent us from exporting natural gas and oil abroad, such as the outdated ban on crude oil exports that dates back to the 1970s. Fully benefiting from the opportunities of the 21st century will require us to reform policies such as these that put us at an international disadvantage. And this includes more than just energy policies. From our tax code to our regulatory system to the dark cloud of federal debt that hangs over our economy, America has steadily become less and less appealing to entrepreneurs and to job creators. Not long ago, there were only a handful of economies on earth to compete against. And now there are dozens of countries vying for the modern jobs that our people need. And so after sparking innovation and expanding markets for our products, our third avenue of reform must be to make America the best place in the world to invest. Investment is what creates higher paying jobs. For example, my father had a job at a hotel as a bartender, and my mom had a job at a hotel as a cashier, not because the government opened up these hotels, but because someone somewhere who had access to money decided to invest that money in opening up those hotels. But in the years since, the growth of government has made this sort of job-creating investment harder to do in America, not easier. We now have the highest combined corporate tax rate of any advanced economy in the world. If you combine federal and state taxes, our corporate rate is nearly 40%, while the global average is under 25%. Just on taxes alone, it's more expensive to invest and create jobs in America than in most other developed countries and most other developed economies in the world. If we stick with the status quo, what we risk is losing the next great American company before it even has the chance to begin. That's why Senator Mike Lee and I have dedicated ourselves to the development of a new, modernized tax reform plan, one that is broad and one that is fundamentally pro-investment and pro-growth. Our proposal will encompass both the individual and business side of the tax code, and it will prioritize replacing our current business tax system with one that is globally competitive. The reforms we are considering, for example, would allow businesses to take a full and immediate deduction for all of their investments. This fair and equal treatment would end the crony capitalist loopholes that benefit politically connected corporations. Allowing businesses to immediately write off investments will not only result in a lower tax burden, it will create an incentive to invest, and that will lead to job growth. Take, for example, a business that brings in $50,000 a month. And let's say that $20,000 of this goes to their basic operating costs. So that leaves the owner with about $30,000 in profit. Now the owner has to decide what to do with that $30,000. Do they withdraw and spend the $30,000? Or do they take some of it and use it for investments that could grow their business and allow it to hire more people? Well, under the current tax system, the safe thing to do is to leave it in the bank. We see evidence of this in the fact that American businesses are sitting on an estimated $4 to $5 trillion of cash in uninvested cash. That's, by the way, more than the size of the German economy. That's almost twice the size or over of the Russian economy, sitting in uninvested cash. Instead of this money being invested to grow and hire, it's just sitting there. But under the changes that we're working on, the more a business invests, the less the government takes away from them. That serves as a powerful incentive to grow, to invest, to hire, and to give their workers raises. Our current tax system, by the way, also discourages growth by placing major obstacles in the path of companies wishing to participate in our global economy. As I mentioned earlier, about 15 to 20% of the value of products made in the world are made by American companies operating overseas. Despite this, under our current tax laws, if an American business makes money in Japan, for example, they have to pay taxes in Japan. But if they want to take that money and bring it back to the United States to invest here in a new factory or to hire more people, they would also have to pay U.S. taxes on the same money. We can fix this. We can fix it by implementing what 28 of the 34 OECD countries already have, a territorial system of taxation. The fact that the vast majority of developed economies in the world already have a territorial tax system, including all of the other G8 nations, maybe soon to be G7, has put American companies at a major competitive disadvantage. So in addition to tax reform, we also need to remove the impediments to investment that are put in place by government. Chief among these, currently, is our health care law that has led to uncertainty and insecurity and rising costs. In addition to that, a national debt that stands at a staggering and hulking $17 trillion and only continues to rise with no plan in place to stop it. And a regulatory code that's become, at best, burdensome and unnecessary distraction. And at worst, an attempt on the part of some to rig the game and pick winners and losers. All three of these, in their own way, are directly contributing to the decrease in private sector investment, as well as the economic insecurity felt in households across America. Obamacare, for one, has become the single largest impediment to job creation today because it is a perfect storm of federal mandates, costly regulations, and aggressive marketplace intrusion that, when taken together, threaten jobs and economic growth on a truly historic scale. Repealing and replacing it with market-based reforms is our only option. To bring the debt under control, we of course need to limit spending, but we also need to reform entitlement programs that are driving our long-term fiscal imbalance and threaten to bankrupt themselves and then our country. And to that end, I have to mention that the budget the President introduced last week was truly a missed opportunity. Washington cannot wait for a debt crisis before solving this problem. But the one I want to really focus on today is revising the last impediment that government's put in place to investment, and that's our regulatory code. That regulatory code, it needs a taste of its own medicine. It needs to be restrained and restricted. And here's how we can do it: by establishing a national regulatory budget. That budget would be set by an independent board which would be tasked with estimating the cost of all the existing federal regulations. And then it would set an amount for each agency's regulations can cost the economy in any given year. And if it's over that amount, these agencies will have to reduce regulations to get under the permitted and budgeted amount. What this would do is this would force federal agencies to enact only those regulations that truly serve an essential role. It would put in place and enshrine the cost-benefit analysis in the regulatory framework that we are lacking right now. So from confronting the threat of Obamacare, our federal debt, our burdensome regulatory system, all these things would go a long way towards restoring the certainty that leads to the private sector investment that we desperately need to create those millions of higher-paying jobs and to claim the American century. In fact, all the policies that I've outlined today are important in their own right, but each is like a single brush stroke. Only when they are combined together do we begin to see what they can really create: a grand illustration of America's potential in the 21st century. As I mentioned earlier, we are already able to say that 20% of the products made and sold in the world are made in America. But imagine when we combine this existing depth of manufacturing capability with the trillions in private money waiting to be invested in our economy, plus a creative and well-trained workforce, plus access to more wireless spectrum, plus abundant domestic energy, plus millions of new global customers, the American economy would take off at a historic rate, and it would create thousands upon thousands of these higher-paying jobs that we desperately need. This is the exciting opportunity before us. We no longer have the luxury of wasting time on the failed promises of big government or the divisive rhetoric of class warfare. The world around us is changing quickly, and we have waited far too long to change with it. We still have time to build the new American century, but we do not have forever. And I hope we will not take for granted how special America truly is. We inherited from those before us the most exceptional nation in all of human history. A truly unique place where the dreams that were impossible almost everywhere else were possible here. When I say these things, some like to say that American exceptionalism is just a national myth. one that we perpetuate just to make ourselves feel better. But I, for one, know that it's not a myth because I've seen it with my own eyes. And I've been touched by it in my own life. My parents were both born into poor families in another land. And by the grace of God, they found their way here. Their lives here were never easy. They both worked well beyond their retirement age. They never became rich or famous. They weren't able to leave us any money or even help pay for college. And yet I would say to you that they lived the American dream. They lived it fully. Why? Because here, they were given the opportunity to live a happy and fulfilling life. They owned their own home, where they raised a family in a safe and stable environment. They found dignified work that paid enough to provide for their children. And they gave us a chance to achieve our own dreams and to achieve a life better than their own. This was their version of the American dream. It gave purpose to their work. It made them feel that their own lives mattered. That even though they never made it big, through us, they had made their mark in the world. And that everything that they had been through in their lives were not in vain. This is the true meaning of the American dream. To have the freedom to decide the kind of life you want and the real opportunity to achieve it. And this dream is neither dead nor doomed, but it is also not self-perpetuating. Each generation before us has had to step up to protect it and to expand it. And now the time has come for us to do the same. So we do live in an insecure and uncertain time. And the world around us is changing, and many of the paths that we once relied upon to take us to our dreams, they no longer take us there. But there are new paths waiting to be opened. And these new paths can bring more people to that dream than ever before. This is the exciting opportunity before us. To usher in a new era of opportunity and prosperity, one better than anything the world has ever seen. To bring about yet another American century greater than the one we just leave behind. And if we do this, we will write the latest chapter in the story of the greatest nation that the world has ever known. So thank you for this opportunity to address you.
Yeah. Well, Senator, thank you very much. Now we get.
Did you hear my phone buzzing in my pocket? That was probably my wife calling to talk about the repair of my American-made refrigerator.
I don't think it interrupted anything. So the Kemp Forum is designed to be a debate and discussion series providing a platform for the civil competition of ideas. Ideas are the lifeblood of this country, and we're so grateful that you are engaging in that competition. And so in that spirit, we've gathered a bunch of people who also enjoy the competition of ideas. We've got a couple of microphones. Senator Rubio is a little bit like my dad. He likes to speak, as you all can say. So we're going to have a good amount of time, but I want to get started. If you don't raise your hand and ask for the microphone, then I'm going to start the questioning. Please. Yes, sir. Please give us your name and where you're from, and then ask your question.
Ray Nard Jackson. Good. Thank you all for putting this on, Jimmy, and good hearing your remarks, Senator. Question: what are your thoughts on the Time Warner Comcast proposed merger?
Well, I believe that's still working through the Justice Department process. Is that correct?
Yeah, at the beginning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I mean, I don't know enough of the details about all the monopoly issues that they would be concerned about to opine on it directly, and I would want to see it work through the Justice Department process. But it's an interesting challenge that we face not just in that sector, but in numerous sectors. We have efforts as well to consolidate, as you've seen recently in the airline industry. We've seen efforts to consolidate as well in the provider area on the mobile phone side. So I think we're reaching this point where there are some industries. The one thing I would argue with regards to content providers such as Time Warner, Comcast, for example, is the plethora of competition that now exists through multiple outlets. I mean, you can now literally get your, for example, cable access or television access, not just through over the air, if anybody still does that. I'm sure there are in some areas of the country. But in addition to multiple cable companies that now provide in areas without any sort of franchise system in place, you also have, of course, the over-the-air satellites and an increasing number of people that are watching on platforms like Netflix, et cetera. So it'd be interesting to see, as not just in that industry, but in multiple different industries, as these consolidation efforts roll out, how 21st century changes to the global economy and the plethora of new ways to gain the same services will influence the Justice Department's decision-making on cases such as this.
Yes, Ron. Wait for the microphone.
Once, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
My question is, I'm a young man who grew up in Washington, D.C., and in the 70s, I saw people from my community thriving as small businessmen. And people don't understand how regulations affect people in my community. However, we don't hear people talk about it from your level, who can speak to the masses about it. For instance, in D.C., people used to drive taxi cabs, and we bought houses, and we sent our children through college. People used to be vendors in D.C. They regulated that out. And there's so many other businesses that people who want to work hard and what I call hustle legally want to do, but the regulations have stopped us and made us dependent on the government. And now they are pushing us out of urban America, and nobody's qualified to stay here because we have not been empowered to do for self. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed. And do you see this as well in Florida or throughout the country?
Actually, it's interesting. I still teach a course at Florida International University on Mondays and Fridays. And so obviously a lot of young students there. I say young because they're half my age now, which is amazing. I guess I'm just getting older. People aren't getting younger, so they must be I'm just getting older. And we had a recent debate in Miami-Dade County about Uber. And these folks had heard about it. In fact, Ashton Kutcher had mentioned it on the air someplace. He's somehow involved with Uber, I don't know. And people had heard about this concept. Maybe they traveled somewhere that had it. Well, the Miami-Dade County Commission didn't allow Uber to come in because of regulation. So for the first time, I see young people that potentially might be friendly to more government involvement in our economy arguing against regulatory impediments to an existing business, in this case, government crowding them out. But you're touching on a different issue, too, which I think is important to point out. There's a number of different fundamental challenges to point to. Number one is a lot of those jobs that allowed, for example, my parents to make it to the working middle class, those jobs don't pay as much as they once did compared to the cost of living. That's become a real challenge. So today, if my parents had the same jobs today that they had 25 years ago, their standard of living would be different because those jobs just don't pay what they once did. The second impediment is that the jobs that do pay what now allow you to rise that sort of standard of living require a higher level of education or training than the same jobs did in the past. But our system of providing people that learning is inaccessible to many people. I'll give you one perfect example, which I use often. My son's football team had a mother in the team, a single mother, who was a receptionist, the front desk person at a medical office. She was also the first person laid off every time things went wrong. In one instance, she was laid off because her boss needed someone that can stay till 7:30. She had to leave earlier than that because daycare closed at 7. The only way she's ever going to get a job that allows her to make more money and have some level of independence and provide more security for her family is if she gets the skills she needs to become an ultrasound technician or a lab technician or something else. But she has to get up in the morning, make breakfast, take her kids to school, work 9 hours, pick them up from aftercare, make them dinner, do homework, and put them in bed. At what point of the day is she going to drop all that and move to a college town for 4 years? So one of the barriers we have to figure out, and this is a regulatory impediment, is how can we help people acquire employable skills that allow them to double, triple, and quadruple their pay, but in a way that people like them can access, because she can't just drop everything and go to college for 4 years. And it also has to be cost effective. And I think sometimes we overlook some of the regulatory barriers that exist in higher education, where only if you go to an accredited institution, accredited by a board of other accredited institutions who have an incentive to keep other providers out, are you able to access some of this learning? So that's a real impediment as well, and one that I think we have to focus on. And then last but not least, the other example I always use. Imagine now if you worked somewhere and decided, I can do this job better than my boss can do it. And because of wireless and internet access, I don't need a big back office to do this. What I just need is access to high-speed internet And I can open up this business out of my spare bedroom of my home. But you are now hit with a book full of regulations at the federal, state, and local level. You can't deal with all that stuff. Your former boss can, because they may not like it, but they have an army of lawyers in-house and outsourced that can help navigate it. In fact, in some industries, they've probably hired a handful of lobbyists to influence the way those rules were written, to keep people like you from getting in. Meanwhile, you can't deal with all that stuff. So you end up being an employee your whole life instead of becoming an employer. That's a real fact as well, and it's the point that I made when I talked about big government. Big government actually hurts people who are trying to make it, because unless you have the power to influence big government, your ability to succeed economically becomes limited.
Yes, right here in the front.
Allie Meyer with CNS News. Do you believe that putting illegal aliens on a path to citizenship, would that be a net spur or inhibitor of economic growth?
Well, a couple points on immigration. The first is on the immigration side, we have a broken legal immigration system. And the legal system is actually something that could help our economy grow, but it has to be changed from our current system. Our current system now is based primarily on family reunification. If you have a family member living in the United States, then you get to bring a family member as well. And by the way, in full disclosure, that's how my parents came. But that was in the 20th century. In the 21st century, our immigration system has to be built more on merit and economic ability to contribute to the economy. That's just the fact of this economy I've just described to you. Our current system doesn't do that. The second issue we have to face is, like every sovereign country on the planet, we have a right to enforce our immigration laws. But we do not have in place mechanisms that do that effectively. For example, imagine if you owned a hotel where you only check people in, but you never check anyone out. Well, that's what we have in our immigration system. We only track people when they enter the country, but we do not have an effective way of determining when people leave or if they leave at all. So that now means close to 40% of those here illegally entered legally and overstayed. There are sectors of the southern border that remain insecure, and people continue to be trafficked across those borders, in addition to drugs and guns and all sorts of other things. And our employers do not have a reliable way to determine who they're hiring and whether that person is legally here and capable of employment, because that's the largest magnet of all. And then last but not least, you have 12 million human beings living in the United States that are here illegally. And that's the part that's most complicated politically. Because on the one hand, there is no serious effort out there that you're going to round up and deport 12 million people. On the other hand, if you reward the breaking of the law by granting people something that they couldn't otherwise have gotten had they done it the right way, or because they didn't do it the right way, not only are you rewarding that behavior, you're encouraging others to do that in the future, and it's fundamentally unfair that those that did it the right way. So the challenge that we face as a country is, how do we face this reality? That you've got 12 million people, and not everyone can obviously stay because they've committed serious crimes, they'll have to leave. But how do you figure out who those 12 million people are, which ones get to stay and which one gets to leave, and those that are going to get to stay, what sort of consequences will there be for having violated the law? Because no one has a right to come here illegally. And that's what I think has been a challenge politically to work through. Primarily because the argument that I most primarily hear now is, you're gonna go ahead and legalize all of those people, but you're never going to put the enforcement mechanisms in place. It's the same argument you hear about tax increases versus spending cuts. They say, and this is proven to be true, the spending cuts get reduced over the years as future Congresses work on it, but the taxes stay in place. The argument I hear from people is, they'll suspend the enforcement, or they'll only enforce the parts they want, but the legalization becomes permanent. And that's been a real challenge in terms of making progress on this. So I think the challenge that we face is, how do we deal with the 12 million people that are here in a way that's realistic, but also in a way that's responsible? And that's proven to be a real challenge. I do believe that if we can reform our legal immigration system, and if we can improve and put in place a better enforcement mechanism, I think it will become a lot easier. Not easy, but easier to address that problem of those that are here illegally. Your last question was about citizenship. That's just a fundamental decision the country will have to make. If the country decides that they're prepared to incorporate 8 or 9 million people that violated our laws, the next question will be, are you prepared to have 8 or 9 million people living among you that can live here permanently for the rest of their lives but never become citizens? And that's an issue that I don't think there's a consensus on yet in terms of, my take on that has been that by and large, I don't think it's good for the country to have people that are forever permanently barred, who are legally here at this point, but permanently barred for becoming citizens. I don't think that's a good place for the country to be. Others that feel differently about that. But I think the broader point you're asking is immigration good for America or not? I think the answer is, it is generally good if it is done appropriately. particularly in the 21st century, if it is the kind of immigration that will bring to the country, there will always be an element of people that are coming for family reunification, and there will always be an element of asylum and people seeking freedom. But the core of our immigration system in the 21st century has to be merit-based. Individuals that are coming to the U.S. to work, particularly in specialized fields, or to invest, or to innovate, or to help grow. And I think that perhaps is the most fundamental reform that we need to make.
Yes, sir. It's coming.
Hi, Senator. My name is Michael Coleman. I'm with the Albuquerque Journal's Washington Bureau. You mentioned your bill that you've dropped with Senator Coons dealing with the national labs and technology transfer. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on why you think DOE has kind of historically been so ineffective at technology transfer, and how would your bill help improve those efforts?
It would reduce in essence, what it would do is it would take down the barriers that make it hard for the national labs to commercialize their products. Because I think where the government can play a limited and effective role is in basic research. What it cannot do is commercialize and develop that research. Imagine if you know, would any of the apps in your pocket or even the platforms that we now use ever have existed or been created if the government had solely retained the internet as its sole domain? The answer is, of course, not. So anytime I think the government has a role to play in basic research. We've seen, for example, the commercialization of products that were innovated through the space program. The question now is how can we now, as quickly as possible, get that basic research into the hands of the private sector so the private sector can use it. And the bill would streamline that process, make it less costly, less time consuming, and easier to do. Your question was about a federal bureaucracy. Federal bureaucracies, by and large, do not have much of an incentive to build the economy. That's not their role. They don't view themselves as that role. And in many instances, when they're rule-making bodies, they seem to have no interest whatsoever. One of the largest complaints that I get from potential business owners and job creators is they feel like it's an adversarial process. When they go abroad and try to invest in another economy, they feel welcomed, and the government agencies there view themselves as a resource to get their investments not just to come, but to get their investments to succeed. In the U.S., they feel as those agencies are always as an impediment, as a trap you need to navigate and a hurdle you need to overcome. And that is an attitude that unfortunately is pervasive throughout government. And one of the ways I know we can practically reduce that is through our regulatory budget idea, where these guys can cook up all the creative regulations that they want, but they're going to have to come under a regulatory cost budget every single year. And that's going to force them to justify these regulations between those that are worth doing and those that are simply being done for other purposes.
Jimmy, last question.
Great. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Senator.
Good afternoon.
My name is Ramon Palmer. I'm with Industrial Bank. My question relates to education. With the escalating costs of college education and unemployment being what it is, we have a number of young people who are having to drop out after having taken on loans. And that type of debt you can't declare in bankruptcy. So you have people who are unemployed, can't pay back their debt, and then they have their credit wrecked, which further makes it difficult for them to find employment. And the escalating cost makes it impossible in some cases for people to get an education. So my question is, what would you do? What is your perspective on how to control escalating costs and how people can work their way out of a difficult situation once they're finished with school?
A couple things are driving. There are a number of issues that lead to the escalating cost of higher ed, but there are two that directly impact the federal government. One is every time we increase the aid packages, it gets eaten up by tuition increases. So when a higher education provider, if they say that the maximum amount you'll give per student per semester is $1,000 for this particular program, there's no incentive for them to charge $700. They're going to charge the full $1,000. So that leads to tuition inflation. The other thing you're seeing is that a growing number of universities are increasing more and more expenditures on non-academic endeavors. More support staff, more administrative staff, more things that are not directly related to teaching skills. That's the first part. The second part is we have too many students graduating from degrees that do not lead to jobs in the 21st century. And I know that that creates all sorts of firestorms in the academic community, but that is a fact. We cannot continue to allow people to borrow $50,000 and $60,000 to graduate with a degree that makes perhaps feel good on graduation day, but regret it for the rest of their lives. And one of the ways I think we address that is through a bill that I filed called Right to Know Before You Go. And what the bill says is that when you go into a school and you take out a loan, you will have to be told, this is how much graduates from our university with that degree are making. So you will know whether it's worth taking out that loan for that job. You may still decide to do so, but at least you've been informed by it. And the last point is, what drives quality and affordability in any industry? Competition and transparency. And we need more of that in higher education. And so for example, there is no reason why students should not be able to acquire the equivalent of a bachelor's degree by being able to package various different ways of learning. Be able to go and say, I've taken 30 credit hours in a traditional course, I've taken 15 credit hours from online free education, I have 10 years of work experience, and I have gained proficiency in these matters that I can test into, the equivalent of an AP exam. And someone package all of that into the equivalent of a bachelor's degree. And I just filed a bill last week that actually creates a pilot program for the federal government to do what Google does, and that is hire people with that sort of alternative education, which is cheaper, just as effective, and much quicker and more accessible to people. My last point on education that I want to make is, do not walk away from vocational education. Do not walk away from what kids can learn in high school today. There is no reason why we can't be training more airplane mechanics, more technicians, more welders. These are growth industries, particularly with energy coming about. We need more of these sorts of employees. There's no reason why we can't hire more people from high school, not just with a diploma, but with a job-ready certification that allows them to go to work day after graduation. We should be doing more of that as well. And I would also argue that community colleges can play a role in all of this, because many of the higher-paying middle-class jobs of the 21st century are going to require more than high school, but less than 4 years degree, and community colleges are important. We need to steer more people in that direction without stigmatizing it. And so if you talk to employers, they will tell you there are a critical shortage in many of these fields. Our education system needs to be geared towards meeting that demand.
Well, I reserve the right to ask the last question, so we'll finish on this. Our mission at the Foundation is to develop, engage, and recognize exceptional leaders who champion the American idea. You've talked a lot about the American idea, the American dream. One of the quotes from my dad that he put in his book called The American Idea, a collection of his speeches, is that the most revolutionary idea in history is that human progress and prosperity are the result of individual freedom and faith. This is not only the most revolutionary idea in history, it is the only one that has really worked. You've been writing a little bit about Ukraine recently, and with everything that's happening there. Would you mind sharing with us how you are encouraging our government and the president to approach Ukraine to address the issues that are there, with that premise that it's freedom and faith that is the undergirding of...
Well, to do so, let's first take a step back and remind ourselves of why this matters. And it matters on two fronts. The first is these are principles that give our nation purpose. The idea, the Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal. Not all men born in North America or all men born in the United States. All people are born with rights given to them by their Creator. This is a foundational belief of our country that we should express in every pronouncement that we make. Whenever that's being challenged or that's being tyrannically oppressed in any part of the world, we need to speak out on behalf of those who are fighting for that freedom that is at the very foundation of our nation. The second point that I would make is, if you look after World War II at this explosion in the growth of prosperous economies, look at South Korea. South Korea in the 1970s had an economy smaller than the North. Today it is a global donor, not even a recipient of aid, a donor, and a vibrant modern economy. Look at how Japan recovered after World War II. Look at the history of some of the Eastern European countries and what's happened to them after. Look at Latin America with the growth in market economies there, and of course the regression in some others. The point is that the expansion of individual liberties combined with free enterprise has created human prosperity on a global scale, which has allowed us, 4% of the world's population, to sell things to millions of people that just a generation ago were living in poverty or under oppression. So there's an economic interest in that. And the challenge that I see now is, if you look around the globe, what are all the challenges that we face in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, now in Latin America and Venezuela, and in Asia? Every single one of these challenges, every single one of these points of conflict on the planet are being created by a totalitarian government. In the Pacific region, it is North Korea and China that's creating all the problems. In Europe, it is Russia. In Latin America, it's Cuba and Venezuela. In the Middle East, it's Iran and Al-Qaeda. all tyrannical either systems or governments. The point of the matter is that oppressive governments view individuals not as people. They view them as things they own, statistics that have no value outside of what they contribute to the state. And that's not just how they treat their people, that's how they treat their neighbors, and that's how they treat other countries around the world. So that has to be confronted, because if you don't confront tyranny, it spreads, its roots grow, until it finds itself at your own doorstep. And the only nation on earth capable of galvanizing the international community to confront tyranny is the United States. We can't do it by ourselves. We're not going to go to war in 15 different countries. But there are things we can do beyond that that can help recede the tide. I mean, Ronald Reagan never invaded the Soviet Union, and yet it came crumbling down because he was never willing to accept them as a legitimate form of government. And we should not either. We should never accept that a government that restricts access to the internet, jails political opponents, refuses to hold free and fair elections, does not allow the media to operate, and guns down people in the streets, we should never accept that as just another way of governing. We should never accept that. We should always condemn it for what it is. And I think the U.S. has to be a leader in that. And Ukraine gives us an opportunity to do that, to say very clearly, we are on the side of those who seek freedom and a sovereign future for their country, and there will be consequences for a tyrannical government that invades its neighbors. And those consequences don't have to be military consequences in order to be felt. We can go after the oligarchs that prop up Putin. We can eject them from the G8 summit, as I joke, not a joke, I'm serious, to a G7. We should work in the long term to make Europe more energy independent so that they're not under the thumb of Russian natural gas and oil. These are real measures that we can take that show the world that there is a real consequence to doing that. And I'll leave it with this. Russia is not the only country on earth with territorial claims that are illegitimate. The Chinese claim that a bunch of islands in the Pacific belong to them. Unfortunately for them, the Filipinos and the Japanese disagree. And so they are watching very closely what's happening with Ukraine. They are gauging what are the consequences and what is the price in the 21st century of executing on illegitimate territorial claims. And if the price is not too high, we may soon find ourselves with a similar territorial conflict in the Pacific, except there we actually have defense agreements with these countries. Except there we actually have a strongly vested interest. That sort of territorial crisis will make Ukraine look like child's play.
Great. Well, thank you all. I want to thank Google for facilitating this competition of ideas, and thank you all for coming, for your questions. Please stay tuned to the foundation. And Senator, thank you for your leadership. God bless you. God bless your family. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Have a great day.